governments generally tend to overreact, and probably this is what they're going to do here as well. They're going to increase welfare spending, probably in certain areas or sectors or certain jobs that are most affected by AI. However, when I look at the over-indebtedness of most of the West, I don't see it realistic that a form of UBI would be implemented because they just don't have the funding.
Welcome, everybody, to Unconventional Knowledge, the GIS podcast. I'm Andy Kureth, managing editor at GIS. Today, I'm joined by Vahan Roth. Vahan is CEO of Swissgrams AG, a company focused on tokenized precious metals stored in Switzerland. He also runs his own investment consulting firm, specializing in long-term wealth preservation strategies. Over the course of his career, he has worked at several major Swiss financial institutions, including UBS, Credit Suisse, and Reichmuth & Co. This week, GIS published a report by Vahan examining one of the most controversial ideas emerging from the rapid development of artificial intelligence, universal basic income. Vahan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
So let's just go ahead and jump right in, because this is something that everybody seemingly is talking about now. And it's a very controversial idea, and it's something that I think will really have important economic and social ramifications across the globe. But just to start, this idea of universal basic income has been around for a long time, decades. But the advances in artificial intelligence have put it really in the spotlight right now. So just to start off, what is universal basic income, and why are people so convinced that it will become necessary as AI continues to evolve?
The concept of universal basic income is pretty simple. It's a regular, unconditional payment to all the citizens of a country. It's a payment that's not based on employment status or income level or any other merit. It's just a payment to everyone. It's basically no string attached payment from the government to the citizens, to all citizens. And the reason, as you mentioned, it's coming up now is due to the strong investment when it comes to AI and robotics. You have proponents like Elon Musk saying that soon AI and robots will be able to not only take care of all the physical work, but will be superior to humans when it comes to cognitive ability. So they argue that it is not just a nice idea to have UBI, it will become a necessity once we have those huge shifts in society.
Okay, so robots are going to take over, or AI is going to take over all of our work, and the government's going to cut us all a check. It sounds great, but I know that you take a much more skeptical view than Elon Musk and others who are, technology optimists. So what is it about their argument that you think doesn't work?
The basis of their argument sounds pretty elegant. The argument is that through AI and robots and automation, we will have an extreme increase in goods and services produced. So if we hand out checks to everybody, thus increasing the money supply, it won't really have an inflationary effect because we have an increase in the supply of goods as well. That's basically their core argument. But I don't think that argument is correct because it doesn't take into consideration that resources are finite. Elon Musk talks of, for example, penthouse for everyone. So if we have advancements in robotics, we might have infinite hands to build those penthouses, as he says, but we don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited energy. So I think that's the core of the issue. So we will not have such a huge surge in the supply of goods. So you're going to have more money chasing maybe a bit higher amount of goods, but not as much as increase in money supply, and thus leading just to classical inflation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I take it that you're skeptical of the argument that AI would become smart enough to help us solve this lack of resources, right? That it would find other solutions.
I am. To put it bluntly, yes. I would say over the last years, My view changed on that, to be honest. Like in the beginning, I thought that the shift would happen substantially faster. But I think even with the advancements of AI that we're seeing substantial advancements in certain niches. We're
Hmm.
not getting even close to something like AGI. So I don't think that AI will help us to find a silver bullet to have unlimited energy and unlimited resources. I don't see that happening.
Fair enough. Even if we set aside the economic questions, a lot of the argument for UBI seems to depend on assumptions about human behavior. So, what are those assumptions that the supporters of UBI make about how people would spend their time if work became optional? Because from what I've heard, it's like a utopia.
Yeah, well, that's their vision. What they believe is that when all needs are met and survival is guaranteed, that people will shift their focus to other things, more altruistic or high purpose, the arts, philosophy, building communities and stuff like that. And yeah, that's basically their view. So we will be in a more peaceful and cooperative society once the basic needs are met. I think that's a bit of a simplistic view because there are a lot of aspects when it comes to work and the structure that it offers to a lot of people and as a motivator. So that part is obviously very important. And I think there's a lot of evidence that we've seen that even when basic needs are met, that we don't automatically have a shift to these extreme creative societies where everybody starts to pursue higher goals.
Right, right. Because we have like people who have won the lottery, and we have experiments, basic income experiments on smaller scales, right? In particular cities or regions, right? And we have the welfare system as well, where people who are unable to work um, get a check from the government every month or whatever it is. And all of those people start dedicating their time to altruistic endeavors and to philosophy, right?
That's exactly the point. So it's not, we don't need to guess what the influence of UBI would be. I mean, we have concrete examples that you mentioned. You can take the welfare state. It's not like everybody who's on welfare becomes this creative artist, entrepreneur, learning new skills. It creates more of a class of people that is dependent on the state. And the other example that you brought as well of winning the lottery, which is also a form, if you like, of unearned income, which came by chance. And there's a lot of studies. There's one, for example, from the UK that actually found that people started to drink and smoke more once they won the lottery. Another one from Sweden, mental health issues. Obviously, in both studies, the financial burden was decreased if you win the lottery, but other topics came up. And the overall happiness of the individuals did not increase. It was just the more money that they had. But there was also an increase in depression and mental health issues and stuff like that. But the proponents of UBI could argue, okay, these are just proxies and don't really make sense when it comes to UBI. But it's not that we haven't had UBI experiments in the past. There was an experiment, I think it was 2017 and 18 in Finland, where 2,000 participants who were unemployed received a check of, I think it was 560 euros a month, something like that. And the Finnish government started this project because their idea was if they have this basic income, that the people would start, they wanted to elevate them out of poverty. They thought, okay, people will start to apply for more jobs, learn new skills because they have more time. But it was quite the opposite. There was no meaningful surge in entrepreneurship, no change in employment, more or less. Obviously, there was a bit less stress when it comes to finances because having more money is, especially if you're poor, is better than having less money. So that is understandable. But from a society as a whole, nothing really changed. The employment didn't change. So I think it's a pretty good example of what is to be expected if UBI would be rolled out on a larger scale. So when I take all these, let's say, first of all, the proxies and also concrete experiments of UBI, I don't think that the UBI narrative holds up.
Right. So not only is it not going to provide all of the abundance that the supporters expect, but also it probably won't lead to a net societal benefit aside from maybe some less stress about having money, but you'll have people who probably won't necessarily become more productive. Um, yeah, that doesn't sound like a great solution. And you touched on this in your answer, and I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on it, because you said, I think, something about how work provides structure, right? One of the themes in the report that we've published is that work provides more than just a paycheck. So what is missing from the conversation when people talk about replacing jobs with government income? What is it that work provides that's beneficial for people that could go missing if we introduced UBI?
I think there are a lot of aspects. One that I mentioned briefly was the topic of structure. I think people require often like a daily routine, a structure, a purpose, and work does provide that to a lot of people. And then there's the social aspect as well. I mean, being around colleagues, interacting with other humans, belonging to a group that's productive, having a sense of contribution to a bigger goal. Psychologically, I would say as well, because working is not only about earning a paycheck, it's about defining goals and being able to achieve them. And that gives you a mental push as well to have. So let's say these are more personal points that I think are important when it comes to work for most people. However, there are also a lot of economic incentives that simply don't work anymore if we implement UBI. For example, if we take savings, if everybody knows that at the beginning of the month they're going to get a fixed paycheck of whatever, their incentive to save is substantially less, be it for retirement, be it for emergencies. And having lower savings rates also influences, obviously, the capital formation, generally investments in the society. Something else would be probably less charity happening, because if you know that everybody in the country is receiving a certain paycheck, then you would ask yourself why it makes sense to be charitable and to help out other people. And it would also, to some degree, I think, decrease wanting to go the extra mile, learning a new skill and to adapt to the ever-changing world that we're in. So yeah, these are some aspects. And maybe the final one, I think there's a huge difference when it comes to, and there are studies regarding that. There's a huge difference if one earns the money or if one just gets it from unexpected windfall, or if it's on. One example I like in that regard is the NFT craze during the COVID pandemic, where there were a lot of stimulus checks paid out to individuals. And it then did correlate with a very short-term narrative and short-term investment speculation. And I think if people would be risking their hard-earned money, then they would have a more long-term perspective.
There's a lot that I heard there that I'd like to dig into, because there are clubs and groups and organizations, teams, cultural groups where people get together and organize and come together for a goal. But you're skeptical that having the time away from work would actually push people toward doing those things, right? That people do those things maybe anyway, even when they have work, and that if they're not doing them now, if they didn't have work, they wouldn't feel like, okay, I've got more time, I can do this now. Is that what your view is?
I think so. I don't think we will end up in a society where people wake up in the morning, go to the sporting club or community, do their sports there, then go to their philosophy discussion afternoon. It will not be a complete
Right.
shift. Obviously, if one has more leisure time, then maybe some activities will somewhat increase in time. But in some, I think people would have huge trouble adapting to such a situation. They would not know what to do with it. And as the examples I mentioned earlier, it's more likely that they would end up, let's say, being not only less productive, but also more unhealthy, smoking more, drinking more.
Right. If I have more disposable income, maybe I'll buy a couple more 6 packs of beer or something like that, to enjoy. And if we could dig into this idea you mentioned about savings, because yeah, if I'm getting a check from the government every month or every week or whatever it is, then why is it so important to save, especially if AI is doing all the work, if AI is doing the innovation? Is it your belief then that, like, some of the innovation is still going to have to come from humans, and yeah, and the investment as well?
I think in any society, investment is something that's necessary, and to be able to invest, maybe saving is the step before that. So I don't think that a society can function without active investment. Even if we say that certain companies are able to automate human labor to some degree, there will always be need for investment. If you take, for example, let's assume the labor that AI and robotics could theoretically provide free labor or at a marginal cost, one would still have to invest in mines, etc., to be able to get the resources needed for production and stuff like that. So just because we have AI, it doesn't mean that we don't need a society without any form of savings and investments.
Fair enough. All of this really rests on the idea that AI is going to eliminate enormous numbers of jobs. And you already expressed a little bit of skepticism that that is going to happen, at least in the short term, as I understand it. So, how likely do you think it is that this elimination of jobs is going to occur? And if not that, how do you think it's likely to play out, actually?
I think that the challenges are definitely real and that the job market will be disrupted, especially when it comes to the service sector, a lot of white collar jobs. And it might be even the case that the transition is faster than with previous technological revolutions. But this is not something necessarily new. It's a pattern that we have in history. You take the Industrial Revolution, the internet, computers, and all cause temporary pain, but we were able to adapt. Like, for example, at the beginning of my career, I still used to use a fax. Okay. But I don't think that anybody today would argue that the productivity gain of email and internet didn't outweigh the job losses that we most likely had in the fax industry. Okay. So we are able to adapt, but I don't think that it's going to be as extreme and as fast that it's being propagated. It's more about, I think, automating certain tasks, but not replacing completely entire jobs. We will find, or humans will definitely delegate certain tasks that are very repetitive and where we don't need humans to do them to AI, and that will increase productivity. But I don't see this extreme job apocalypse happening. And
Yep.
one thing,
Yeah, go ahead.
when we look at the IPOs that all large AI players are planning today, I mean, it fits very well into their narrative because the valuations that they have are extremely high and not warranted necessarily by the current revenue that they're generating. But if you make the pitch as an AI company that you're going to replace human labor, then obviously that has a positive impact on your valuation. So I think to some degree, like the things that Musk and other AI proponents are saying is somewhat kind of a marketing ploy as well, to some degree.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think some of the recent evidence bears that out. You find companies that have laid off swathes of their workforce and tried to replace it with AI. And what they found is they haven't gained efficiency. The companies that gain efficiency tend to be smaller, medium-sized businesses that have used AI to supplement their workforce rather than replace it. At least that's what I see in the news today. Whether that'll happen in the future, whether that'll be different in the future, I mean, I think remains to be seen. But I think that the current evidence supports your point that at least for the short to medium term, we're not going to be replacing everybody's job. But if UBI is the wrong answer, then what should policymakers be thinking about instead as they prepare for a more AI-driven economy? Because as you said, there is going to be pain, there is going to be transformation, there is going to be change. So if you were in the policymaker's seat, what would you be doing to help ease that pain and that change?
Yeah, I'm personally a big proponent of deregulation and irrespective
Sure.
of AI, but I think it is applicable here as well. So governments shouldn't try to just replace lost income by implementing something like UBI, but to focus on deregulation. I would say they should make it a lot easier for people to reskill, find new work, start new businesses, and generally make regulation a bit lighter on entrepreneurs to be able to start new businesses. And I think that's essential. And then we mentioned previously the welfare state. I mean, that needs some sort of reform as well, or a lot of reform. But if you take, for example, the benefit cliffs, okay, that's basically incentivizes people not to work more, because as soon as they earn a certain income, their total income gets reduced because they're going to get less of a paycheck from the government. So like a disincentive to work like that is absolutely crazy, and is something that needs to be eliminated. I think the core of what needs to be done is deregulation.
Okay. Yeah, that's certainly something that many of our experts, many of our reports here at GIS support. So when you look at the coming potential AI disruption, what do you think is the most likely scenario going forward? How do you see this whole phenomenon moving forward? And how do you think governments, societies, companies are going to address it?
Yeah. Sadly, I don't think that they'll follow my advice or of the other just experts and start deregulating.
Right.
The thing is, there will definitely be a challenge. There will be jobs that are displaced, especially in certain sectors. It won't be as huge as I mentioned earlier, but governments generally tend to overreact, and probably this is what they're going to do here as well. They're going to increase welfare spending, probably in certain areas or sectors or certain jobs that are most affected by AI. However, when I look at the over indebtedness of most of West, I would say, I don't see it realistic that a form of UBI would be implemented, because they just don't have the funding for it. Another option would be, we have, for example, when it comes to environmental polluters, we have like an environmental tax that punishes these polluters. It might be a possibility to have some sort of AI tax, have a higher corporate rate for AI companies to be able to fund certain welfare programs that the governments are planning. I think in the end, like we've mastered, as humanity, we've mastered a lot of challenges in the past, and this one will not be different.
Great. Well, Vahan, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. I think it's going to be really helpful for our listeners, our viewers, as we move forward and this kind of craze around AI continues to build, because I don't see it really stopping anytime in the near future. We'll see as it develops what happens. But as we continue to think about this, I think that this discussion will really help people think about whether UBI is really the right answer. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.
That's it for this episode of Unconventional Knowledge, a podcast from Geopolitical Intelligence Services. Thank you for listening. New episodes are released on the first Monday of every month, so subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to stay updated. For more analysis on global affairs with a detailed focus on future scenarios, visit gisreportsonline.com. And if you'd like to explore how any of the trends discussed today could affect your business or industry, email us at advisory@gis.li for a consultation or a custom report. We'll see you next month.